Every morning, billions of people wake up without realizing that above their heads hangs a wall of death. Concrete and earth dams as tall as skyscrapers hold back volumes of water equal to entire seas. Tiny cracks constantly appear in these structures, old seams widen, and the foundations are washed out. When engineers discover such damage, they know somewhere an invisible timer has started. The only question is how much time is left until disaster. Years, months, or just hours. In northern Iraq stands the Mosul Dam, a structure that international specialists unanimously call the most dangerous dam in the world. Imagine a construction more than 3 kilometers long and as tall as a 40-story building, holding back 11 billion cubic meters of water. That is a body of water the size of the Great Salt Lake, hanging over the heads of 1.5 million people. Every day here unfolds an invisible battle between humans and nature. The dam was built on karst formations, gypsum and anhydrite, which dissolve in water like a lump of sugar in hot tea. Geologists warned about the danger of this decision, but this site was much cheaper than others. Authorities decided to build here and deal with the problems as they came. The result was predictable. Under the foundation, voids the size of buses constantly appear, and workers try around the clock to fill them with cement. It is like trying to patch a sieve. Plug one hole, 3 new ones appear. Since its construction in the 1980s, so much cement has been pumped under the dam that an entire city could be built from it. But the process of the rock dissolving never stops for a minute. Engineers understand perfectly. Sooner or later, they will lose this battle with nature, and then a wave as high as a 15-story building will cover Mosul in just 1.5 hours. A city with a population of 1 million will disappear as quickly as a sandcastle is washed away by the tide. Within 3 days, the water will reach Baghdad, flooding the capital to the depth of a 2-story house. Experts have calculated that as many as 1.5 million people could die faster than a football match lasts. Norwegian specialists who examined the dam in 2016 discovered that the foundation continues to sink at an alarming rate. At the bottom of the reservoir, sinkholes as deep as a 5-story building have appeared, traces of dissolving rock. One of the leading experts compared a possible breach to the detonation of a powerful nuclear bomb, except that the consequences would stretch for hundreds of kilometers along the Tigris River. The Iraqi government hired an Italian company for urgent repairs, but the engineers honestly admit they are only prolonging the agony, not curing the disease. But Mosul is far from a unique case. Human history is full of examples of how water turned into a weapon of mass destruction because of people themselves. In August 1975, a typhoon struck China's Henan province. The rains were so heavy that in a single day, the amount of precipitation equaled the yearly norm. The Banqiao Dam, one of the largest in the country, could not withstand it. At midnight, the concrete wall split with a crack, and water rushed down with the speed of a freight train. Witnesses said the sound was heard tens of kilometers away, as if the earth itself had split in two. A wave as high as a 3-story building raced through the valley, sweeping away everything in its path. Villages disappeared in seconds, leaving behind not even foundations. People, woken by the thunder, ran out of their homes and saw a wall of water rushing toward them, but there was nowhere to run. The current reached speeds of 100 kilometers per hour. The catastrophe triggered a domino effect. The collapse of Banqiao caused the failure of 62 smaller dams. The entire river system of the province turned into a giant destructive flood. By sunrise, an area the size of Belgium was underwater. Official Chinese sources concealed the scale of the tragedy for a long time, but independent researchers established that more than 170,000 people died. That is more than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. 11 million people lost their homes and became refugees in their own country. One survivor recalled, "I woke up to a strange sound, like the roar of 1,000 dragons. I looked out the window and saw the horizon moving toward us. At first I didn't understand what it was, and then I realized it was water, a giant black wall of water with foam on top. It was higher than the rooftops and was coming faster than a person could run. But even dams in good condition can turn into weapons of destruction if nature decides to show its strength." In Italy, in the Vajont River Valley in the early 1960s, one of the tallest dams in the world was built. A graceful concrete arch as tall as a 70-story building was a true marvel of engineering. Italians were proud of their creation and were not at all concerned that local residents had long called the nearby mountain the one that walks. Within 3 years after the reservoir was filled, Monte Toc really began to move. At first, these were small landslides, a few thousand tons of rock, insignificant compared to the size of the mountain. Geologists warned about the growing danger, but their voices were drowned out by official assurances of safety. On October 9, 1963, the patience of the mountain ran out. At 10 p.m., 300 million cubic meters of rock, a piece of mountain the size of the center of Paris, crashed into the reservoir at the speed of a falling meteorite. Imagine this. In just 40 seconds, a mass of stone and earth equal to 1,000 Egyptian pyramids plunged into the lake. When such a colossus hits water, the liquid bursts out in all directions as a giant wave. A monstrous rock tsunami was born. This wall of water spilled over the dam like milk boiling over a pot. Only instead of milk, it was a mass equal to the weight of 1,000 aircraft carriers. A wave as tall as a 20-story building rushed down into the valley, where unsuspecting people were eating dinner or getting ready for bed. The town of Longarone, with 4,000 residents, disappeared in 5 minutes. Of its 400 buildings, only 22 survived. The water moved so fast that many didn't even realize what was happening. Death reached them faster than sound. 12-year-old Michaela Coletti was one of the few survivors. I heard what I thought was a clap of thunder, incredibly loud. My grandmother came into my room and said she was going to close all the shutters because a storm was coming. At that exact moment, the lights went out, and I heard a sound that is impossible to describe. The closest thing I've ever heard was the sound of metal shutters crashing down, but this was a million times worse. I felt my bed collapsing, as if a hole opened up beneath me, and an irresistible force was pulling me down. The girl was dug out from mud and debris only hours later. She was so black with silt that she looked like an old woman. Rescuers at first didn't believe she was only 12 years old. In most of the flooded towns, 80% of residents died within the first 15 minutes of the disaster. The total death toll exceeded 2,000 people. The most sinister part of this story is that the Vajont Dam still stands today, whole and undamaged. It survived the impact of a 300 million ton mountain. The problem was not the strength of the concrete, but human arrogance. Geologists had warned about landslides on Monte Toc, but engineers decided they could predict and control them. They underestimated the speed of the catastrophe. The mountain collapsed in 40 seconds instead of the expected hours. Today, the empty dam towers over the valley like a monument to human pride. In the modern world, the threats have not become smaller. On the contrary, they have grown to sizes undreamed of by the builders of the 20th century. In China, on the Yangtze River, stands the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroengineering structure in human history. This concrete wall, 2.5 kilometers long and as tall as a 60-story skyscraper, has created one of the biggest artificial lakes in the world. A reservoir 600 kilometers long. Behind it is stored as much water as in all of North America's Great Lakes combined. When this giant was built, 2 cities, 114 towns, and 1,680 villages went underwater. 1.5 million people were forced to leave the homes of their ancestors, the largest forced resettlement in peacetime. The Chinese government is proud of its creation, calling it a symbol of conquering nature and technical progress. But geologists are sounding the alarm. The dam stands in the zone where 2 major tectonic faults intersect. Since the reservoir was filled, the number of earthquakes in the region has multiplied. The weight of the water is so enormous that it literally bends the Earth's crust. Scientists have recorded hundreds of tremors, and each year there are more. In the event of a strong earthquake or a massive landslide, the consequences would be catastrophic for hundreds of millions of Chinese living downstream on the Yangtze. In 2020, record rains hit central China, and the Three Gorges Dam came close to overflowing. 400 million people, more than the entire population of the United States and Canada combined, spent several days waiting for a possible catastrophe. The water rose to critical levels. and the authorities urgently opened all the gates, flooding millions of hectares of farmland downstream. It was a choice between the lesser and the greater evil. German-Chinese hydrologist Wang Weiluo warned, "The design, construction, and quality control of the dam were all carried out by only one group of people, and the project was finished too quickly. If the Three Gorges Dam collapses, it will be a disaster beyond imagination. Tens of millions of people will not be able to evacuate. They will simply have nowhere to run." But even in the richest countries in the world, where money is not spared on safety, dams turn into deadly traps. In February 2017, in California, part of the spillway of the Oroville Dam, the tallest dam in the United States, collapsed. A hole the size of a football field appeared in the concrete wall, and water began chaotically eroding the mountain slope beneath the structure. California authorities understood, if the erosion reached the base of the dam, the wall could collapse completely. Behind the Oroville Reservoir was stored as much water as the entire city of Los Angeles consumes in 2 years. If that mass had poured down, a wave as tall as a 9-story building would have covered the Sacramento Valley, where more people live than in the whole of Finland. Within hours, nearly 200,000 people were ordered to leave their homes immediately. Highways turned into giant traffic jams of fleeing cars. People grabbed only the bare essentials and ran, not knowing if they would ever see their houses again. Mothers carried children in their arms. Elderly people walked on the roadside because their cars were stuck in traffic. It was the largest evacuation in California's history. Engineers worked around the clock, releasing water through the damaged spillway and reinforcing the slope with rocks the size of cars. For several days, the entire valley lived in fear of catastrophe. Luckily, the dam held, but the repair cost $1 billion, more than the entire American lunar program when recalculated into modern money. The investigation showed that problems with the spillway had been visible 10 years before the accident, but were ignored. Engineers saved money on inspections, and officials turned a blind eye to the warning signs. One expert said, "We were playing Russian roulette with nature and almost lost. We were just lucky there were no bigger rains." In Africa, another drama is unfolding. On the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe stands the Kariba Dam, one of the largest artificial lakes in the world. This concrete arch, as tall as a 40-story building, was built in the 1950s and for a long time was considered a model of engineering skill. But 60 years of non-stop work have taken their toll. Water falling through the spillways has carved out a crater at the base of the dam, as deep as a 30-story skyscraper. This hole keeps growing every day, moving closer to the dam's foundation. If the erosion reaches the base, the wall could lose its support and collapse. European experts who inspected the dam came to a terrifying conclusion. In the event of failure, 500,000 people could die and 3 million could be affected. The economic damage would exceed $20 billion. The tragedy is made worse by the fact that most of the potential victims are the poorest people, who live in huts along the river and have no means to evacuate. They do not even know about the danger hanging over them. The governments of both countries prefer not to frighten the population. International organizations have provided money for urgent repairs, but the work is moving slowly. Every day of delay increases the risk of catastrophe. In 2024, drought almost completely dried up the Kariba Reservoir. The exposed bottom showed the scale of destruction. The crater was even larger than engineers had expected. But the real danger will come when the rains return. All the water that has been held back during years of drought will hit the weakened structure with double force. In Pakistan stands Tarbela, one of the largest earth dams in the world. This structure is not made of concrete, but of millions of tons of rock and soil piled across the valley of the Indus River. The dam is as tall as a 50-story building and 4 kilometers long. Behind it is stored as much water as the whole world consumes in half a year. Earth dams seem more reliable than concrete ones. They are more flexible and handle earthquakes better, but they have a terrible weakness. If water finds a weak spot and begins seeping through the body of the dam, it becomes impossible to stop. Water washes soil out from the inside, creating hidden channels that grow bigger every hour. Once such a channel breaks through to the surface, the whole dam can collapse in minutes. Tarbela was built in one of the most seismically active regions on the planet. Here the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates collide, and earthquakes stronger than magnitude 7 happen regularly. In the event of a powerful shock, the dam could crack, and then the Indus Valley with its 40 million people would be in danger. Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, lies only 100 kilometers from the dam. The Pakistani authorities built an early warning system, but experts doubt its effectiveness. If such a massive dam bursts, the wave will reach the densely populated areas in just a few hours. Evacuating tens of millions of people in such a short time is physically impossible. Modern disasters show that the danger has not gone away. In January 2019, in the Brazilian city of Brumadinho, a tailings dam collapsed, a huge pond where mining companies store waste from ore processing. These structures are built on the same principles as ordinary dams, but hold not water, but toxic sludge made of sand, clay, and chemicals. At 12:30 in the afternoon, alarms on the dam showed critical readings, but workers did not even have time to understand what was happening. 3 minutes later, the wall collapsed, and 12 million cubic meters of poisonous sludge rushed down the valley. The flow moved at the speed of a racing car, destroying everything in its path. Surveillance cameras recorded an apocalyptic scene. A gray-brown mass as tall as a 3-story building rushed between the hills, swallowing forests, houses, and cars. In just a few minutes, entire neighborhoods disappeared under the toxic mud. People caught on the path of the flow had no chance. The sludge moved faster than a human can run and was denser than water. 270 people died, and another 11 are still listed as missing. Their bodies are still being searched for under many meters of hardened sludge. Environmentalists call it the worst man-made disaster in Brazil's history. Toxic substances poisoned the river for hundreds of kilometers, wiping out all life in the water. The investigation showed that the company knew about problems with the dam, but hid the information from the authorities. 2 years before the disaster, engineers had already recorded warning signs: deformations in the dam body, high humidity, and small cracks. But the management decided that continuing operations would be cheaper than spending money on large-scale repairs. In India in 2013, nature showed that not only man-made dams can be dangerous. In the Himalayas near Kedarnath, a glacial lake burst, a natural reservoir formed by a melting glacier. Such lakes have served as natural dams for centuries, but climate change has made them extremely unstable. In June of that year, record rains began in the mountains. In one day, as much water fell as usually falls in a month. The glacial lakes could not handle the load and began to overflow. One by one, the natural dams of rock and ice burst, creating a domino effect. Torrents of water rushed down the mountain valleys, carrying boulders the size of buses. The holy city of Kedarnath, which every year receives hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, was at the center of the disaster. A wave of water and rocks, as tall as a 5-story building, struck the city early in the morning, when most people were still asleep. The ancient temple, built 1,000 years ago, survived, but everything around it was wiped from the face of the earth. Eyewitnesses said, "At first we heard a sound like a train approaching. Then we saw something dark moving between the mountains. It was water mixed with stones and trees. It moved faster than a person could run. People screamed and tried to climb higher, but many were caught by the torrent. Officially, 6,000 people died, but the real number is likely much higher. Thousands of pilgrims are still listed as missing, their bodies carried into rivers or buried under rocks. Rescue operations continued for months, but most victims were never found. Even in Europe, where it seems every technology has been perfected, dams can turn into weapons of death. In France in December 1959, the Malpasset Dam collapsed, a graceful concrete arch built with the most advanced technologies of its time. The cause was an error by geologists who misjudged the strength of the rock foundation. The dam stood for only 5 years. On the night of December 2nd, engineers noticed the arch beginning to deform. They decided to release water urgently, but it was already too late. At 8:30 in the evening, a roar echoed, and 200 meters of concrete wall collapsed into the valley. 400 million liters of water surged toward the town of Fréjus, where people were peacefully having dinner in their homes. A wave as tall as a 3-story building traveled 10 kilometers in 20 minutes. Frejus was wiped off the map in 15 minutes. 423 people died, including many children. This disaster showed that modern technology does not guarantee safety if people make mistakes in their calculations. In August 2009, at the Sayano-Shushenskaya hydroelectric station in Russia, an accident occurred that could have become a catastrophe of planetary scale. In the machine hall of the power plant, one of the giant turbines exploded. The force of the blast was enough to throw the turbine cover, weighing 1,500 tons, 15 meters into the air. The hall flooded and 75 people died. But the truly terrifying thing was not what happened, but what could have happened if the explosion had damaged the dam itself. The Sayano-Shushenskaya Dam is one of the largest in the world, and its reservoir holds more water than the Dead Sea. If the dam had cracked, a wave would have rushed down the Yenisei River through Krasnoyarsk and other cities where millions live, many of whom would not have had time to escape. Luckily, the wall held, but this accident showed that a single broken part can put millions of lives at risk. The most sinister part of the modern situation is that all these examples are just the tip of the iceberg. Across the world stand tens of thousands of dams, built in an era when no one thought about climate change. 2/3 of all large dams in the world are more than half a century old. They were designed for a climate that no longer exists. Rainstorms have become many times more intense, droughts harsher, and extreme events have turned from exceptions into the norm. The climate is changing faster than people can adapt. Rains that used to happen once in 1,000 years now occur every decade. In Libya in September 2023, Cyclone Daniel dropped in one day as much water as the region usually receives in a year. 2 dams above the city of Derna could not bear the load and collapsed one after the other. The unleashed torrents washed 1/3 of the city straight into the Mediterranean Sea, killing more than 10,000 people. Engineers openly admit they do not know how to adapt old dams to the new reality. Building a new dam costs as much as a mission to Mars. Destroying one means leaving millions without electricity and water. All that remains is to patch holes and pray that the wall lasts one more day, one more year, one more flood. The statistics are relentless. Over the past 20 years, the number of serious dam accidents has increased tenfold. If, at the end of the 20th century, major breaches happened 3 or 4 times a year, in recent years they have been recorded every week. From 2015 to 2019 alone, there were more than 170 significant accidents. That is more than in the entire previous half-century. The reason lies not only in aging structures, but also in the fact that nature has become much more aggressive. Meteorologists are recording record rainfall in places where it has never happened before. In Australia, rains flooded deserts, snow fell in the Sahara, and in the far north, temperatures rose to 40 degrees Celsius. Dams designed for the climate of the past century turned out to be defenseless against the storms of the future. Experts warn the worst is yet to come. By the middle of this century, most people on Earth will be living downstream from dams built by their grandfathers and great-grandfathers. 70,000 large dams around the world are slowly reaching critical age. In Europe, the average age of dams is more than 100 years. In the United States, 70. In China and India, 50. This means that in the coming decades, the wave of accidents will only grow. The situation is especially dangerous in developing countries, where safety is often sacrificed to save money. In Africa and Asia, thousands of dams operate without proper supervision or maintenance. Their condition is rarely checked, and if problems are found, there is no money to fix them. These dams are ticking time bombs with an unknown countdown. Wars and conflicts make the situation even more dangerous. Dams become military targets because their destruction can cause more damage to the enemy than bombing cities. When fighting takes place near a dam, maintenance stops, which sharply increases the risk of failure. In Sudan, several major dams are currently in conflict zones, and no one knows what condition they are in. Terrorists also understand the destructive power of water. Seizing or blowing up a large dam can paralyze an entire country, which is why all such structures are now under heavy guard. But it is physically impossible to fully secure every approach to thousands of dams around the world. The scariest part is that there seems to be no way out of this trap. Humanity has fallen into a vicious circle. The more people live on Earth, the more water and electricity are needed. The more dams we build, the more people are placed at risk. And climate change is making that risk ever more real. Engineers propose radical solutions. Some believe that old dams should be demolished and replaced with safer technologies. Others argue for building protective dams downstream, capable of stopping a wave from a breach. Still others call for mass relocation of people from danger zones. But all these plans require time and money that do not exist. Demolishing one large dam can cost as much as building a new one. And while experts debate and plan, old dams continue to age. Cracks keep widening, and more people live beneath them. The history of humanity is full of civilizations that disappeared because of water. The Minoan culture on Crete perished after a tsunami. The Mayan cities in the jungles of Guatemala were abandoned after river courses shifted. Angkor in Cambodia was deserted when its complex system of canals and dams stopped working. But never before has the fate of hundreds of millions of people depended so heavily on structures built by their ancestors. We live in an era when water has once again become the greatest threat to civilization. Only now it is not tsunamis or floods, but our own engineering legacy. We built dams to tame nature, but nature turned out to be more patient than us. It has waited for decades, drop by drop, eroding our creations, and now it is ready to take everything back. Every crack in the concrete is its message to us. Every landslide at a dam's foundation is a warning. Every record-breaking flood is a rehearsal for future catastrophe. We can keep patching holes and closing our eyes to the problem. We can hope we get lucky, that old dams will last a little longer. But sooner or later, water's patience will run out. And then it will remind us who the true master of this world really is.